Alrighty, hello YouTube, welcome back to my channel. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Cryptic Coil, and for those of you who do know me, I'm doing something a bit different in this video. I'm talking about one of my favorite horror franchises, Scream. This is my aged Ghostface mask from Scream 6. Obviously, it's not the real mask or the one used in the movie, but it's like modeled after the one used in the movie. So that's cool. I'm also sitting on a ghost face blanket that I have on my couch. You can see a photo of that on Instagram. Alright, so in today's video, I want to talk about a fan theory that's just really blown up among the fandom. Sorry, let me get that. So there's this fan theory that has just really blown up, among the fandom. People are making all kinds of content about it on YouTube and Reddit and whatnot. And so if you haven't seen the whole franchise, I wouldn't recommend watching this video because I don't want to spoil any of the movies. But the fan theory goes that Stu Macher survived his death at the end of Scream 1. And his rich parents colluded with the town sheriff, and they covered up his survival, and he spent the rest of his adult life in hiding. And as a consequence of that, there's a Ghostface cult. We saw hints of it in Scream's. There was an intention to have a Ghostface cult in Scream 3, but then we saw hints of it in Scream 4. We saw another hint of it, or more hints of it in Scream 5. By the time we got to Scream 6, the Ghostface cult was pretty much an open secret, and I happen to believe that when they release Scream 7, the Ghostface cult will no longer be hinted at or an open secret. It's going to be a central plot line, central part of the plot for sure. And I'm definitely not alone in that thinking. Okay, and then on top of that, the fan theory is that Stu Macher, the character played by Matthew Lillard, is behind the Ghostface cult. Okay, so in this video, I want to tell you what my thoughts are on that, how I feel about it, what I'd like to see, what I wouldn't like to see with Scream 7. And then, let's see what else. Oh, yeah. And then if this fan theory happens to be true, some people think that Dewey knew about it. Some people think that Dewey knew about it going all the way back to Scream 2. And that explains why he was so protective of Sydney. So that's what I want to talk about in today's video. So let's get into it. So I am not one of the fans that has been calling for the return of Stu Macher. I think that one of the reasons why people are so passionate and enthusiastic in calling for the return of Stu Macher is because they love the actor Damian Lillard. Damian Lillard. Oh. I was watching NBA highlights prior to this. Matthew Lillard. I'm so sorry. Yeah, so I think that what it is that people just really love Matthew Lillard, and they want to see Matthew Lillard come back as Stu Macher, and also someone coming. The Scream franchise lacks supernatural elements, so bringing Stu back would be the closest thing to bringing somebody back from the dead, a la Jason Voorhees or Michael Myers, that the Scream franchise would have to offer if they choose to bring Stu back. And speaking of Matthew Lillard, even he wants to come back and play Stu Macher. Even he's kind of on board the Stu train, as we call it. The Stu train is those that want to see the return of Stu Macher. Now, where do I stand on the Stu train? I'm on board, but not enthusiastically. I haven't been sitting back calling for this, since having learned that, this fan theory was a thing. But once I learned about this fan theory, the people who buy into it are so passionate and enthusiastic about it that, whether right or wrong, I'm led to believe that they speak for the majority of the fandom. And I could be right or I could be wrong in that assumption, but that's what I think. I think that they do speak for the majority of the fandom. And because that fan theory has also kind of captivated and seduced members of the cast and crew of the Scream movies, I kind of feel like I have to, like I'm obligated to be on the Stu train. So I had to hop on board. And I also feel like the writers are kind of obligated to make that a thing in Scream 7. So that's kind of where I stand on the Stu theory. Now, that leads us to, let's talk about Dewey real quick. Did Dewey know about this all along? I believe it was Scream 4. Someone asked the question, who's Stu Macher? And Dewey answered the question in the present tense. And he said that, and I'm paraphrasing here, but he said, Stu Macher is Billy Loomis's accomplice. He's a real, like, whack job or something like that. So if Dewey's present tense reference of Stu Macher was an allusion to the fact that Dewey knew that Stu had in fact survived his death at the end of Scream 1, I don't believe that Dewey knew about it as far back as Scream 2. I think that Dewey probably learned about it after Scream 4 had started, because by the time we got to Scream 4, Dewey was the sheriff. And when he was within his first several years as a cop in law enforcement, he wasn't respected by his own peers. That took time for him to earn that level of respect and grow into his own. And something like the sheriff colluding with the Macher family to cover up Stu's survival and let him evade arrest, something like that would be so scandalous that an unrespected young cop like Dewey wouldn't have been privy to that information. So I think that as Dewey rose the ranks within the police department, he probably eventually learned through access to evidence and perhaps even documentation, and he probably connected the dots and realized, oh wow, it looks like Stu Macher isn't dead after all. He survived, and there was a cover-up involving the then sheriff of Woodsboro. And I don't know exactly when he would have found out, but I think that if he had found out during the happenings of Scream 4, he probably didn't want to tell Sydney, because let's stick a pin in that. I'll get back to why he didn't want to tell Sydney as early as Scream 4, when he probably found out at the earliest. So some people seem to think that he would have found out all the way back in Scream 2. I'm not on board with that fan theory at all, because, like I said, he was, a young cop, and he wasn't very well respected and probably wouldn't have been privy to information that was that scandalous. So some people will say that he did know back in Scream 2, because that's why he was so protective of Sydney. Well, Dewey had lost his little sister, and his little sister and Sydney were best friends. So the reason why he was so protective of Sydney was because he had a void in his life that used to be occupied by a younger sister. Now that he no longer has a little sister, Sydney has filled that void for him. especially because they endured everything that they've gone through together. Um, just the events of Scream 1 alone were enough to secure that kind of a bond between Sydney and Dewey. That's why he was so protective of her in Scream 2. Uh, I said that we were going to stick a pin in the Dewey thing, and I think I pretty much covered it. So if he did learn about it, as early as Scream 4, he didn't want to tell Sydney because Sydney is going to struggle with paranoia and PTSD for the rest of her life. The events of Scream 1 would be enough for anybody to struggle with paranoia and PTSD for the rest of their lives. But then she had to endure Scream 2 and Scream 3, and now here they are in Scream 4 when Dewey could possibly have learned about Stu Macher, and he doesn't want to throw another log on the fire. He just doesn't want to add any more fuel to the fire. So he didn't say anything to Sydney because he was trying to protect her. And then in Scream 5, we find out that Dewey's has stepped down and that he was even asked to step down. But that's just the story that he gave us. I think that if Stu is alive, and I do believe that that's probably where the writers are going to go with Scream 7. I think that when Dewey had uncovered the scandal, I think that he probably confronted some people, maybe some people in high places, and I think that he probably it probably wasn't as clear cut and dry as like him being asked to step down. I think that tensions were just really high, and it was probably mutual, and he might have even been threatened. And I think that's one of the reasons why why he ended up going to New York with Gail. And I think that maybe that's even why he couldn't, in his own words, cut it in the big city, because he probably brought that trauma and that shock from Woodsboro to New York, and that's enough to mess anybody up. I think that probably played some pretty dangerous mind games with Dewey's character. Now, there are some other fan theories that I'm not going to get into, and I'm going to try to wrap this video up really quickly. One more fan theory pertaining to Stu Macher is and this is being promoted heavily by Sista Pam. I think that she's the one calling for this, and I absolutely love her channel. If you haven't subscribed to her, you should. Her name is Sista Pam, as in Pamela. Sista Pam. So she seems to think that maybe Christina Carpenter fooled Mr. Carpenter once again into raising another child that was not biologically his own. And that the real biological father of Tara is none other than Stu Macher, because Christina Carpenter could have found out somehow that Stu Macher was still alive and had a fling with Stu and gotten pregnant with Stu, and once again deceived Mr. Carpenter into believing that it was his own child that she was carrying. I'm just gonna be honest about this. I don't want to see that in Scream 7, because bringing somebody back from the dead I wasn't really dead, I faked my own death, and now I'm back, and now I'm the leader of this Ghostface cult, and on top of that, I'm Tara's biological father. That's too far deep into the soap opera territory. And I kind of feel like this franchise is already skating on thin ice, what with the survival of the core 4 members, the fact that Tara, Mindy, and Chad all survived their brutal attacks in Scream 5, and then the core 4 was brought back together in Scream 6 when we kind of assumed that some of them were dead, but it was nice to see them back. And then they suffered even worse attacks in Scream 6, and they all survived, including Gale. I really don't want to see the Stu Macher as Tara's father storyline happen on the screen, because I think that now it's time for the writers to reel it back in. The survival of the core 4 and Gale was already, like, kind of bad writing. The fact that those attacks were as brutal as they were, and yet they all survived, that's bad writing, okay? And then the fact that we were told that Amber was the one that killed Dewey, and we were told that Jessica was the one that killed Gale's boyfriend Brooke, and she manhandled him and just threw his body like a rag doll. They might be able to explain that if they bring Stu back and say that it was actually Stu who killed Dewey, and it was Stu who actually killed Brooke, and Amber and Jessica just took the credit. But I feel like this franchise is kind of skating on thin ice right now. And I think that if they did do something like make Stu the father of Tara, it would be shocking at the time of release. But then after that, it's not going to age well. And the Scream franchise is very lucky in the sense that they don't really have any bad movies under their belt. Even Scream 3, which the general consensus seems to be is the worst movie in the franchise. Scream 3 is actually still a super good movie, though. And Cody Leach has put it like this: if Scream 3 is the worst movie in your franchise, you're doing pretty good. And I think that's the general consensus. But I think that Scream 7, if they do that whole, Stu is Tara's father angle, I think that's going to age very poorly and bring the rest of the franchise down. And it's just going to get thrown, it's another log thrown on the fire with the whole core 4 surviving everything that they survived in parts, 5 and 6. And if it, and if they don't use, Stu to explain how Brooke was manhandled and how it would be a lot more believable if Stu killed Dewey than Amber. And so if they don't kind of right those wrongs in Scream 7, I'm just really worried that the ice is going to break. So those are my thoughts and my feelings on it. One more thing, though. Even though I did admit to kind of obligingly getting on board the Stu train, I will say I believe it was Zach Cherry who said that Stu never struck him as an evil genius, and I kind of feel the same way. If they do bring Stu back and they do have him behind the scenes of the Ghostface cult, I'm going to have a hard time believing that Stu is capable of being the brains of the operation, because looking back, I don't see Stu as a leader. I see him as a follower, and I also see him as kind of a sissy. There was the, oh, you just hit me with the phone, man. And then the, my mommy and daddy are going to be so mad at me. Now, that line is iconic, and it's hilarious, and we were all highly entertained by it, myself included, myself especially. But, I just kind of, see Stu as a sissy, and you're telling me that, this, incompetent... Oh, incompetent. Okay, you want to know why I'm calling Stu incompetent? When we first met him, after the scene where Casey Becker was killed and strung up and left dead, when the kids were sitting around the high school talking, Stu just out of the blue goes, "Nah, I didn't kill anybody." And then Billy had to reel Stu back in, and he's speaking through his teeth. "No one said you did, pal," elbowing him in the ribs. "Shut the F up." So I think that there needs to be a higher power than Stu, somebody who can serve as the brains behind the operation, a puppeteer manipulating Stu's puppet strings. And Stu will then have to be like totally committed and devoted to the cause, absolutely believing in the cause for whatever whacked out reason he has inside his head. But we're going to need to have that higher power figure, because I just don't see him as an evil genius either. And I just think he's too incompetent and too much of a sissy to lead the cult by himself. So those are my thoughts on the Scream franchise, especially regarding the Stu Macher fan theory. There's a couple other fan theories that I want to talk about, and I think I'm going to make some more videos coming up. Thank you guys for watching. Let me know what you think in the comment section below. Horns up. Peace out.